May I now invite the Minister of State for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Electronics and IT, Mr. Rajeev Chandrasekhar, onto stage for a fireside chat with Surabhi Agarwal, Editor Technology of the Economic Times. Mr. Chandrasekhar. All right, Surabhi, over to you.
Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar, for being here. It's a real privilege to have you join us for the ET Startup Awards. So you've donned many hats. You started off by being in the Silicon Valley, developing Pentium chips. And then you were one of the first telecom entrepreneurs when you launched BPL Mobile. Right from there to being a privacy activist, a parliamentarian for 15 years, and an avid investor in India's startup ecosystem. Now that you've moved to the other side, and you're soon going to, complete 1 year in the government, I want to ask you, what is it that the government should do, or rather not do, to make sure that this momentum in the startup ecosystem is accelerated and not disturbed?
So, thank you, Surabhi, for having me over. Thank you to the ET for bringing the ET Startup Awards back to Bengaluru. This is where it should be, and I suggest that you just do this permanently in Bengaluru. It will solve a lot of problems. To all the friends who've come from outside Bengaluru, welcome. To all my friends from Bengaluru, namaskara. Ellarigu namaskara. Look, Surabhi, one of the best ways to understand what we are experiencing today, and this, as Satyan very beautifully put out there, is to also look back at the last 7 years on where we started from. And if you just look at 2014, and I'm not trying to make a political speech here, but it's a reasonable ask to look back at where we reached, how we've reached here. The government has done tremendous things over the last 7 years to create an overall enabling environment of what has now just caught the imagination of not just Indian entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs all over the world. And which is to create an environment where capital is available, innovation is encouraged, and through a mix of government policies, and as Satyan mentioned, this reach of the internet to the furthest parts of India, we have created what we are experiencing and seeing today. And I say this in the context of what was, let's say, in 2010, 2011, there was this famous research report from the Credit Suisse that was called House of Cards. And I like saying this example again and again. There was this data that said that 97% of India's banking system's net worth was corralled by 9 families and their borrowings. Now, you have in 2022 a situation where every young entrepreneur, every idea, has a reasonable opportunity to get financed, has a reasonable opportunity to grow, and frankly, the system is not so much of a risk or a disabler of this promise or this aspiration as much as the capabilities of the individual are. And so we've reached, in my opinion, a time and a place in the evolution of the Indian economy and the innovation ecosystem where the entrepreneur and his idea has a more than reasonable chance of succeeding. Moving forward, I think you will see the government outlining more policies and expanding the opportunity space through its own consumption of technology and through policies that will allow other areas of technology to be exploited by startups and entrepreneurs.
So like you said that there is a enabling ecosystem and a lot has happened in the last few years to create that ecosystem. But yet there are many, many challenges. One of the biggest challenges is that we don't have clarity when it comes to policies. For instance, the data protection bill, the e-commerce policy. I'm told that the Tatas are not able to sell their own Titan watches if the draft of the e-commerce policy is to be followed. Homegrown companies, our own social media companies are very concerned because they might be termed as publishers and be liable for each and every content a user posts. There are challenges on compliance front, there's non-personal data issues. So the industry is waiting for clarity and the government is not moving ahead on this. So could you just clear the air on this?
No, So, I mean, I can clear the air, but it's not going to give you any more clarity than you have today, in the sense that I don't think there is any lack of clarity. One of the things that the government is very clear about is this momentum of innovation, this momentum of growth of the startup ecosystem. We will not do anything knee-jerk. We will not do any policy making that will come even remotely as a speed bump or retard this momentum. So that is in itself, in my opinion, a clarity. Now, you know, there is this I'm always fascinated by this recent obsession with personal data protection, because all the way from 2010 to the most part of 2017, everybody thought privacy and data protection was an academic issue that was left to the elite to worry about. And it's good that now everybody has joined this mainstream discussion. But I think the reality of policy making is somewhere in between, which is having no protection at all for the citizen consumer and having an absolutist approach to all of these issues. And the reality of policy making and rules and regulations is somewhere in between. Because what we don't want to do is, you know, to use the quintessential phrase, throw the baby out with the bathwater. It is clear, as the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister said, the next 10 years are going to be India's decade. And make no mistake about that, it is going to be India's decade. And so we want to be very measured. We want to be absolutely clear about every policy step that we make, that it adds to the momentum that we have, rather than in any way create any disruption or ambiguity. So I think over the coming months, you will see a data governance framework be rolled out. You will see all of these elements that are required to celebrate entrepreneurship and expand entrepreneurship be rolled out very systematically with public consultation, with stakeholders' involvement, as well as all of the elements that are required to secure the citizens' right to privacy and other aspects of their data privacy.
Right. So that's some really strong statements coming from the minister. Thanks for that. But like you said, that the next decade is going to be a tech decade. And if you look at the public goods that India has produced, be it Aadhaar, UPI, it's a fantastic case of how the government has created these digital rails on which the private sector has innovated, be it UPI, and we've seen the rise of companies like Paytm and Google Pay and PhonePe, etc. What is your vision when it comes to these public goods? What is the government's next steps on this?
Thank you for asking that question, Surabhi. And I think this is a question that needs to be explained in in a slightly different way. When the Honorable Prime Minister launched Digital India in 2014, he laid out broadly 3 objectives. And I just want to share this for those who don't know, and if those who know, please bear with this repetition of this. He wanted technology to empower and transform citizens' lives. And so therefore, he wanted technology to be deployed for better governance and better democracy. So that was one. The second pillar was that he wanted technology to create more opportunities for entrepreneurship, investment, jobs, and therefore expand the digital economy pie. And the third was that he wanted India to be a world-leading nation in the race for technology in certain areas of technology. Now, if you look at the first part, between 14 and let's say 19, before COVID, the government rolled out in its digitizing of the government process, Aadhaar-linked identity authentication, and that, based on that, a large number of public services, including defying this conventional wisdom narrative of democracies being leaky when it came to delivering subsidies. Then it launched UPI, and it launched the entire, digital payments ecosystem. What has happened as a consequence of both those efforts at driving digital technologies into government is the fallout has been that you've created an ecosystem of entrepreneurship, investments in the fintech space, in the digital payment space, in the payment service provision space. So this model of the government accelerating its digitization, government accelerating the digitization of digital to citizen interfaces, that is going to be a tremendous force multiplier for entrepreneurship of the ecosystem around that. So if to go back to your question number 1, What can the government do? One of the things the government is doing and will continue to do is to accelerate the digitization of its own activities and its own governance and public delivery, service delivery processes.
Sure. Apart from accelerating its own governance and which will fuel the country's digital ecosystem, I want to understand from you that what is your vision for new technologies like metaverse and Web3? I'm sure many VCs and investors sitting here will vouch for it. That on a daily basis, pitches are piling up when it comes to these kind of companies who are very, very interested in exploring the next phase of the internet. How can India take a lead in these new areas?
So I want to start by saying, I think if you're a dispassionate observer of nations and the deployment of technology and the digital economies, you will find that India is today, and it's being widely acknowledged, India is today one of the preeminent countries in terms of using technology and being at the forefront of innovation. I think it is clear from our understanding that we will be leading the charge into Web 3.0. We will be leading the charge into all of the innovations around the internet. But I want to just add to your question by saying that the decade is not just about the internet. The decade is not just about the metaverse and Web 3.0 and discussions around crypto. There is, as I think Satyan mentioned, there is artificial intelligence. There is a whole set of opportunities that are emerging today because of this geopolitical shift away from China's domination on electronics to creating alternate destinations and supply chains for electronics around ESDM, electronics design and innovation, around semiconductor design and innovation, around AI, around deep tech in areas like supercomputing and quantum computing. So I tend to say to groups of entrepreneurs and startups who meet me that while consumer tech and the internet will remain exciting, and there are going to be areas that will continue to expand, don't forget that there is an interesting opportunity that is now emerging in front of India post-COVID, which is around the entire electronics device, ESDM, semiconductor space. And as you know, the government of India under Prime Minister Modi has put $30 billion of record capital to support the electronics and semiconductor space. So a lot of innovation is going to come out of there, and I suspect it's not just about Web 3.0 or Metaverse, as exciting as they are. I think the excitement is also in these other areas.
Sure, I think that's one of the areas where we miss the bus and it's a good opportunity to catch up. You mentioned crypto and I'm very, very tempted to ask you that in the budget we had a tax imposed on digital assets. There's also been a little bit of confusion with people in terms of whether India has legalized crypto, because in the budget we also spoke about a digital currency, but we don't know what's happening to the crypto bill. So could you just help us understand this space?
It's a little above my pay grade to comment on this, but it's a different ministry and it's a different. But I was in a room when the similar question was asked of the Honorable Finance Minister just a few days ago in Bengaluru, and I'll just verbatim repeat here on her behalf what she said. She said that the ministry is in consultation on a crypto bill, and that consultation is with stakeholders in the crypto community as well as the Reserve Bank of India. And when, at the right time, at the right place, there will be a crypto bill or not, as the case may be. But I just want to add my 5 cents to crypto, and I said some things after the budget as well. The legality or the illegality of crypto is really about who is buying crypto and how he or she is buying crypto. In India today, we are not a fully convertible currency. And therefore, if you're buying a dollar-denominated asset, whether it's real estate, whether it is equities, whether it is cryptocurrencies, you have to be pretty sure that you're doing this legally. There is a law called FEMA on the statute book for precisely that reason. So you have to be sure that if you are buying crypto, you're doing it through a legitimate RBI-approved route, or it's through the LRS scheme where you are allowed $250,000 a year. If there is a third way you are buying crypto or you are acquiring crypto, the odds are that you are already afoul of the law. And that's something that you may want to consult with your lawyers. That's the only point I can say.
All right. So just moving back to the startup ecosystem, last year we've seen record, unicorns. We've also seen record IPOs, and some of those have kind of not fared very well. Yes. Do you think this rush towards moving, towards the public markets would force companies to prioritize corporate governance and profits over valuations? What's your take?
I don't think so. I think, I think diversification of sources of funding and financing for startups is something that is required. It is part of what I would think is necessary for a sustainable startup and innovation ecosystem. I wouldn't lose too much sleep about valuation going up and being overpriced or underpriced. That thing is hitting me on the. Okay, no. I thought that was deliberate or something. So I wouldn't worry about that. I think it's probably healthy for startups to have multiple sources of capital, not depend on private equity alone. Public markets are a good way for them to get financed. In terms of companies if you hit a public market, to be more disciplined, bit more rigorous in your management, that is absolutely true. Whether that necessarily accelerates the path to profitability, I don't believe so. There are many startups that are IP driven and that are targets for acquisitions, and the value is really not the profitability or the cash flow, but is the intellectual property of the technology. So that may not be as big of a driver, but rigor in terms of management, discipline, all of that I think is something that public markets very quickly teach you if you're a startup.
Sure. So with that, I'll just wrap up this session with one last question. I know you are a Bangalore boy, but there have been recent debates about whether Delhi is a startup capital or Bangalore is a startup capital.
Bengaluru.
No doubt. All right. Thanks you so much for this great session. It was a great conversation.
Thank you
for being a lovely audience. Thank you.